Isn't it awfully embarrassing when you're at a place and you start laughing, and it's a place where you shouldn't be laughing because it's very inappropriate to be laughing at a funeral or something serious like that? In the book of James, chapter 4, verse 9, we read the words, lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Now, when you read a verse like that, obviously, you've got to put it in its context. A few sentences earlier, the Bible is talking about friendship with the world makes us an enemy with God. And it talks about asking for things that we have no business asking for. Obviously, what's being addressed here, when you put it all together in its proper context, is that we should lament and mourn and weep when we try to be a friend with the world and make ourselves an enemy of God. We should not find funny or entertaining things that God considers sinful and illicit behavior. And it's pretty strong as it's kind of hammered to us. 1, 2, 3, lament, mourn, weep. We hear the word lament, and maybe we think about Jeremiah's Old Testament book of Lamentations, where he talks about the sorrow he has over the sinful behavior of God's people. We hear the word mourn, and maybe we think about Jesus' statement in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I think we can very clearly make an application about mourning for sin. And then we hear the word weep. And there are many things we could think about in the Bible, but in Luke chapter 7, there's a woman who's known to be a sinful woman who weeps at Jesus' feet. And that's the kind of attitude we should have about sin. That's the kind of attitude we should have about the things that make us an enemy of God. They're not entertaining. They're not funny. They're things that should cause us to lament and mourn and weep and turn our laughter to mourning, our joy to gloom. There's an interesting contrast in this very book of James with the word joy. In James chapter 1, verse 2, it says, to count it all joy, my brethren, when you fall into various trials. What's being talked about there is that we have joy over the things that build and strengthen our faith. So it's joyful. But what's being talked about here is when we have joy over the things that destroy our faith, the things that are sinful and that we find entertaining or funny. We should never laugh at those things. No, instead, we should lament and mourn and weep over sin, especially our own, because Jesus says, ultimately, we will be comforted.